All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. So our learning target here, we were looking at the importance of the Sui, Tang, and Song dynasties of China. So we have three different dynasties that we're going to talk about today. Essentially three or almost four time periods, because we'll talk about what came before them as well. Basically, we're going to get through kind of half of the stuff for China today. So Chinese empires after the Han Dynasty. So first of all, we're looking at a map here. We've got Europe on the left, China on the right, and two different colored lines. We have red lines and blue lines here. Go ahead and type your response here on the Pear Deck. What are the lines representing? Hopefully it looks familiar. All right, let's see our responses. Trade routes, good. Blue is waterways to get to China. Red is by land. Yes, trade routes, trade. Travel, trade, trading. Yes, good. So we are looking at trade routes here. And more specifically, we're looking at trade routes basically that are connecting the Roman Empire here. City of Rome is where this blue line over here on the left is. And they're connecting them with particularly China here. And they had a particular name at this time period. This was called the Silk Roads that connected Rome with China. And that name comes, and it makes a lot of sense because they were trading silk, right? That was the most important product that the Romans were after. Coming from China was silk, and then the Romans would trade back. So around 500 BC to 500 CE, basically around the time of the Roman Empire here is when these trade routes were really, really important in trading that silk, especially by land up here. Now, we're talking about China here. We're starting about the year 220 CE. And so I'm not sure how much you remember from last time you learned about China, probably in 7th grade. It might not be a whole lot, and that's okay. So we're talking about the end of the Han Dynasty in 220. For those of you that need a reference as to what the Han Dynasty is, it's when Mulan takes place. That's the easiest way I can describe it. So if you're familiar with Mulan, that was the Han Dynasty. So this is just after that. So essentially, the Han Dynasty lost control and split into 3 separate kingdoms, each of which was trying to essentially take over the others and gain full control of the entirety of China. And so because of this kind of constant state of three-way warfare between 3 different kingdoms, there was a lot of problems within China and a lot of kind of uncertainty for the people without this singular government. So that's why it's called the period of disunion, because there are a lot of struggles for the people of China. And so because of this constant state of warfare, people start to search for something that will kind of give them peace, right? If everything around them is kind of in this constant state of warfare, they want to kind of live happily within their homes. And so this is when they turn to this new religion called Buddhism that has come up from India. So Buddhism, if you have not learned about it already, centers around the Buddha, who is this enlightened person and taught people essentially how to live their lives free of kind of the stress of desires. So what we're going to do here is I want to show a video, but with first hour, it was kind of tough. So because the sharing screen thing doesn't work that great for that. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to link the video in the Meet chat. And what I'll do is I'll have you guys watch the video here on your own. So the video is called Eastern Philosophy of the Buddha. It's from The School of Life is the name of the channel. So I'll give you guys a couple minutes here to watch that video. And while you're watching the video here, I'll leave this Pear Deck slide up, asking you a question about the video. It says, according to Buddhism, what is the path out of suffering? So the video is about 5 minutes long here, so I'll give you guys until about 9:20 here to watch the video and answer this question here on the Pear Deck slide, and then we will come back together. So go ahead and watch the video and answer the question. All right, so the video should be coming to a close here, getting close to it for most of us here. So the video is talking kind of first about how Buddhism was established by Siddhartha Gupta, who became the Buddha, right? He starts off as this very wealthy prince, but once he sees kind of the suffering that people go through, he starts to meditate and reaches this state of nirvana, which is essentially this state of kind of ridding yourself of desire. So how do you get out of suffering? Finding your inner peace by meditation, changing your outlook, not your circumstances. Yes, good. Managing or removing your desires. Good. So that was kind of the main point they were trying to make about suffering, is that the reason people kind of go through hardships is because they're constantly searching out these desires. So people are always trying to get more things, make more friends, make more money, get more power, all those sorts of things. And essentially Buddhism says you should let go of those earthly desires and follow this noble eightfold path to get rid of your desires and reach this state of nirvana. So very good. So this was essentially a way for people to find a little bit of peace when the world around them wasn't looking that great. So with kind of the constant warfare happening, a lot of these Buddhists essentially try to rid of their desires and live peacefully. Good. So eventually China is going to be reunited under the Sui dynasty. So a Chinese leader is able to use his military to reunite those three kingdoms back under control of one ruler. And so his powerful government is able to manage to kind of keep control of this entire country. And their biggest achievement is going to be something called the Grand Canal. So canal being a man-made waterway. And essentially what this was is it was a way to connect southern and northern China in order to transfer food from the places that could grow it quite easily, that being southern China. And it actually flowed north up towards the modern-day capital of Beijing. So this is a 1,800 kilometer I don't know the translation to miles. It's very long. Man-made waterway, and very, very impressive. Still the longest canal that exists in the world today. So being created by the Sui dynasty, and that's kind of the main achievement that they had. Now, the Sui dynasty does not last very long. It only lasts actually 2 rulers. So after Wendy, his son took over. But after that, it's going to end only about a 40-year dynasty here. But they are followed immediately after by the Tang dynasty, which is going to essentially be the dynasty that came up with a lot of the inventions that we talked about when we've talked about China and other parts of this class. So this is when the people of China invent gunpowder. So originally used in fireworks, but eventually, Europeans use it as a weapon. Classic. But also other things like porcelain is invented during this time period. The compass, which we talked about during the explorers, right? So able to navigate. This comes out of the Tang dynasty, and also woodblock printing, which is essentially the first sort of quote unquote printer. And because of these inventions and because of the trade that they're doing with the rest of the world, China is going to kind of regain kind of the prominence that it had had during the Han Dynasty as it was trading with Rome. So they were trading with Japan, Southern Asia, and importantly, the Byzantine Empire. So to kind of connect it to what we've talked about before, Justinian was around 625-ish. So the Tang Dynasty were the ones that were trading with Justinian and the Byzantine Empire. So some of those inventions here, we have the pointer, the south pointer as it was called before, but it's an early form of a compass. This was a magnetized spoon and it would spin to point in the right direction. We also have woodblock printing. So basically what they would do is they would carve the letters into a piece of wood, and then you could create the same page over and over and over just by putting more ink on it and then slapping the paper over top of it. So this was really important for religious texts especially. So Buddhism is being spread, and so to spread kind of how to meditate and the different sayings of the Buddha. They just had to carve it into this piece of wood once, and then they could print off tons of the same page multiple times. And then over here on the left, some of the architecture here that probably looks familiar. This is a Chinese Buddhist pagoda where they would go to pray. The last dynasty here that we're going to talk about today is the Song dynasty. So after the fall of the Tang, we have the Song dynasty, which is really different because of how its government was set up. It was a merit-based government. So what that means is they would give people jobs within the government based on their abilities, not on their namesake or their family or their standing in society before. So how they would do this is they would give something called a civil service exam to people when they were in their late teens. And then based on how you did on that civil service exam would determine where in the government you would be. So only the people that did the best on the civil service exam, those being the scholar officials as they were called, would get the highest paying jobs and therefore have the highest standing in society. So much, much different than how society was set up at the same time in Europe. This is when Europe has the feudal system where you're born a peasant and you stay a peasant forever. In China, they have these civil service exams where people were constantly kind of moving back and forth between the different classes based on how they had done on the civil service exams. Now, an important thing, though, to point out about these civil service exams and kind of probably the biggest negative of the Song dynasty is the fact that this was essentially exclusive to men within China. This was not something that women were allowed to do. It was a very male-dominated society. Now, because of these new inventions and this kind of new sense of prosperity, this was going to allow China to increase in population dramatically. So the Tang dynasty had about 70 million people, and then just a few years later, by the Song dynasty, they have over 100 million people living in China. It was easily the most populated place in the world at the time. So a question here on our slide: what problems might come from a massive increase in population? All right, let's look at our responses here. Get more food for people, easier to spread diseases. Yes, definitely that will be a problem. Overpopulation, definitely. May run out of things, not enough food, not enough healthcare. Easier to spread disease. Taxes and government issues, definitely. Good. Less materials, not enough food. Good. Yeah, definitely. So that's definitely something that the people of China might start to struggle with because, 30 million people, that's a lot more people to feed. It's a lot more jobs that are required. We'll see that this will also be a problem with the Black Death that comes not too long after. So a lot of different things are going to cause problems here in China. Now, one thing that I mentioned earlier that is going to be a part of this next problem is the role of women in this society. So, like I said, it was very male dominated, and women were kind of forced to be almost less than, or I would say a lower class than men within society. And that is definitely kind of shown by something called foot binding. So men were able to increase their status in society by taking civil service exams. They were able to own land. They were able to get whatever jobs they wanted, while women were forced to do things like this. So especially higher class women were mostly the ones that would be forced to do this. but they were encouraged to stay in the home to not get jobs, but then they would do something called foot binding. So essentially what this is as a girl grows up, so it would start when they were very, very young, around 2 or 3 years old, they would bind their feet essentially with like tape or really tight cloth. And they would bind them up so tight that sometimes it would even break the feet, and it would make it so that they wouldn't grow properly. And so this would give them very, very small, very tiny feet. And they would put the feet into these fancy looking shoes. So they would make these really ornate designs on these really tiny shoes, and then they would try and fit the feet inside of them. And essentially what this was is it was a symbol of the man having control over them. So they would force the women to ruin their feet so that they could hardly walk, so that they would be kind of forced to have the husband do things for them, right? So they can't go out and get a job because they can hardly walk. Very horrible and painful practice that starts here during the Song Dynasty. Definitely a horrible thing that unfortunately still continues in some parts of China today. So we're going to have another video here that I'm going to link in the Google Meet. So it is, 3 minutes, 40 seconds long here. So what this video is a reporter went to China. This was, what year? 2014. So not too long ago, about 6 years ago. She went to China and she went to some very small villages. And she found people who had their feet bound as children, and are now, these are mostly very old people at this point. So just a warning, there are some pretty gross pictures in this video of what some of these feet look like as they are kind of fully grown and developed after being bound. So I'll give you guys a couple minutes here to watch that video. And then on the Pear Deck here, what are your thoughts on this practice of foot binding? So I'll give you guys a minute here to watch that video, and then we'll talk about kind of what it showed here together.